Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the September 13, 2021 work session of the Ann Arbor City Council, where we will be discussing water system facilities planning. Mr. Hupy, you have the con.
Thank you, and thank you to Council for their time this evening. Brian Steglitz and Glenn Wazorek of the Water Treatment Plant and their consultants would like to share with you the options that we have coming up as we look at the future of the water treatment plant, particularly the replacement of Plant 1. Brian, take it away.
All right, thank you, Craig, and thank you, Mayor, for the opportunity to present to Council tonight. I'm going to be doing the speaking, at least initially, by sharing our presentation, and then we're going to open it up for an opportunity for Council to comment and ask questions. I'm going to ask Karen if you can share your presentation right now to get us started. Thank you. And I'm going to turn off my video. I'm traveling. I'm doing my best to make sure that I can maintain connectivity. But if we do have a problem, Glenn Wazorek will step in as our backup plan. So again, thank you for the opportunity to talk about Ann Arbor's water future. I want to do a quick intro of the folks who have helped put this together and who are also here on the call tonight. AECOM, our consultant, we have Corrine Mulwick and Bob Green. From our public engagement consultant here on River Group, we have Tina Olson, who will be facilitating the Q&A after the presentation, and Karen Sakenga. We also have Elisa Speranza with 7th Ward Strategies, and you all know Glenn Wazorek, who has helped work very closely with this team over the past couple months to put together the briefing materials that we've shared with you and this presentation. Next slide, please. So a little bit about our expectations over the next hour and a half. You will spend about maybe 20-25 minutes giving you a presentation, just the highlights of some of the information and the briefing materials that we've shared. And then after, we'll have an opportunity for Council to react to some of the information that we've shared and ask questions. And again, that will be facilitated by Tina Olson. She will recognize Council members through the hand raising feature that you're already familiar with from Council meetings. The other expectation that we have from this meeting is to make sure that at the conclusion that Council has a clear understanding of these alternatives that we're going to be presenting to you tonight. So you have the ability to make a decision about Ann Arbor's water future in a future Council meeting when we'll be bringing resolutions for your consideration. Next slide, please. So as part of background, of course, Ann Arbor wants to continue to provide reliable, high quality water into the future for our customers. And in order to do that, significant capital improvements are needed at the existing water treatment plant. That's what we're going to talk to you about tonight, as well as other alternatives that could be considered as we decide whether we're going to make investments in the city's infrastructure. Next slide, please. So in 2015, we performed an alternative analysis where we looked at a lot of different alternatives regarding reinvestment in the city's water treatment plant. And before we would undertake such a large project, it sort of behooved us to look at what alternatives also the city could consider. We looked at expanding the existing well fields. We looked at building a new water treatment plant, possibly in a different venue. We looked at connecting to a regional water provider. And when we talk about regional water provider throughout the presentation tonight, we're always, we're referring to the Great Lakes Water Authority because they're really the only regional water authority that would have the ability locally to be able to feed us a city of our size. And each of these alternatives as part of this 2015 study were assessed against city's water quality goals, sustainability framework, our customer service requirements, and regulatory requirements. So our intent today is to revisit this. So many of you were not members of Council at that time, so weren't familiar with the presentation we did. So we felt like this is the right time to bring this back for your consideration. Next slide, please. So what's happened since 2016? Well, I already mentioned, we've had some substantial changes in governance, several new council members. There's also been some changes in city policy. For example, the 820 policy, looking at sustainability. These weren't in place back in 2015. We've also had some water quality challenges that we faced. Several of you are familiar, all of you are familiar with PFAS, which we've been dealing with over the past several years. Cryptosporidium, wasn't an issue that we had to implement additional treatment for. That's also post 2015. And obviously everyone's aware of the continuing threat of dioxane in the groundwater and the migration towards the Huron River. So a lot of things have continued to progress since 2015 that really necessitates revisiting some of the recommendations. Next slide. And then the fourth item that I wanted to just quickly bring your attention to is all the work that's happened since 2015. So we've made a lot of progress in continuing to reinvest in the city's infrastructure associated with the water system. We added ultraviolet light disinfection to address cryptosporidium. We've improved our ability to address PFAS by looking at how we manage our filters. We're using a different filter media now. We're looking at the frequency of replacing that, all of this to address finished water PFAS levels. We're continuing to monitor and have plans to broaden our monitoring of the dioxane plume migration towards the river. Over the next couple of years, we'll be installing some sentinel wells between the leading edge of the plume and our intake along the Huron River. Right now, we're in the process of a design build project to improve the automation and control system at the water treatment plant. We're also wrapping up a project where we've looked at addressing some building envelope challenges like roof leaks, masonry that's deteriorated. So we're wrapping that work up currently. And we recently finished a project at the Steer Farm well field to improve reliability out there by changing our gas-driven pumps to electric. We also have now remote monitoring of that infrastructure. And lastly, some electrical systems improvements at Barton Pump Station, which, as you all know, is our raw water pump station that provides over 80% of the water to the water treatment plant. So in total, this is over $15 million of improvement to the water system over the last 5 to 6 years. Next slide, please. So there are two alternatives that we want to highlight for discussion tonight. The first is rehabilitating the water treatment plant at the existing site. So you've already heard about several things that we've done. So we have been working on rehabilitation over the past 5 or so years. But here, what we're really focused on is the area within the green dash square on this slide. That is the original plant, was built in 1938, so over 80 years old, and then an addition that happened in 1949. So when we're talking about plant 1 replacement, Craig alluded to this in the intro, this is the area that we're talking about within the green blocks. We have a separate plant, which we call plant 2, which is, you can see in the red box, 1965 and 1975. Again, not very new, but that's sort of our workhorse right now. And this project is not looking at touching that. That would be something that would be potentially addressed several years in the future if needed. Next slide, please. So the second alternative is joining a regional water supply, the Great Lakes Water Authority. So what this slide illustrates is the distances between where we would connect to the system if that was something that we were going to entertain. We're talking about, together, over 28 miles, and that's as the crow flies, likely be a fair bit longer than that as you try to deal with rights of ways and navigating from the existing connecting points to the city's water system. So we're talking, 28 plus miles of large diameter water main in order to provide the redundancy and reliability the city would be needed if it was in the future going to connect potentially to the Great Lakes Water Authority. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to go through this slide in very much detail. It's in the briefing materials, but I want to highlight a few things. We looked at these two alternatives that I just mentioned, and we evaluated them against several criteria that we identified. And as you look at this slide, you see green, yellow, and red colors. Green would denote the lower risk of impact. Yellow would denote a medium risk, and red a higher risk. And we looked at things like water quality, carbon footprint, autonomy of the water system, and we scored the two options against each other. And there's a lot additional backup in the briefing materials that are online and that have been shared with you prior to the meeting. But as you see sort of across the board, you see a fair bit larger number of green dots under the alternative 1 versus alternative 2, indicating that pretty clearly in comparing these evaluation criteria, the rehabilitation of the city's water treatment plant is a lower risk alternative than connecting to the regional water supply. And if council members, after we're finished with the presentation, had any specific questions about elaborating on any of these evaluation criteria and how we did this assessment, we'd be happy to go into that in a little bit more detail. Next slide, please. So I want to spend the majority of the rest of the time of this presentation to talk about the financial impacts. We know that that is a significant factor in weighing into this decision. So this first slide is about capital costs. So purely how much money would it take to rehabilitate the water treatment plant versus connecting to the regional water authority, the Great Lakes Water Authority. And you can see based on the 2015 estimate with dollars that are escalated to current 2021, you see the rehabilitating the city's water treatment plant option comes in just over 100 million in comparison to over 300 million for connecting to the regional water supply. So from a capital cost standpoint, fairly significant difference between the two alternatives. Next slide, please. So I'm going to walk you through how we build the annual revenue requirements for the water system, and I know you're familiar with that term, but this is the cost that it takes for us to operate the system. And as you hear, and this is annual revenue requirements. So you can see when we compare the two alternative 1 to alternative 2, at this point we're just introducing the base load of costs that would be incurred under either alternative. If the city did connect, for example, to the Great Lakes Water Authority and become part of a regional water system, it would still incur these costs because we would still be operating a water utility. We would still be delivering waters to our customers. We would still be involved in billing. We would still be involved in planning. We would still have to do the financing. So from a distribution standpoint and from an administrative standpoint, those costs would incur under both options. So that's sort of the base load for two options. You can also see on the side, because of how the graph has sort of squished the top two, we have called out what the top two line items, which would be financial, customer service, and systems planning. So apologize for the overlap, but it's called out on the left side so you can differentiate between those two items. The next slide, please. So as we begin to build on top of our base load, here's where things start to diverge between the two alternatives. If we continued to if we invested in the city's water treatment plant, we'd have to obviously be up to continue to operate and maintain the water treatment plant. And that's what that additional bar that has been added on the alternative 1 represents, is the annual cost of operating and maintaining the water treatment plant. Next slide. So if we were going to join a regional water supply, our cost of operating and treating the water at the city's water treatment plant would be substantially reduced, which is reflected in the alternative 2 smaller bar for water treatment. The reason why it's still there is because there is a likelihood that we would have to do some amounts of minimal treatment if we were going to connect the regional water supply, likely some boosting disinfection, possibly some corrosion control. It's pretty standard for member utilities of the Great Lakes Water Authority to have to do some minimal treatment. So we have included in here some amount of budget to do that. And likely the water treatment plant itself would become a distribution system point. So while some of the treatment infrastructure wouldn't have to be upgraded and maintained, we'd still probably need to still operate that facility as a potentially a place to boost some chemicals, but also to distribute water to our customers. Next slide, please. So the cost that we would, the next cost that we would incur under alternative 2 would be obviously purchasing water from the Great Lakes Water Authority. And we estimated that based on utilities of comparable size. And there's two parts to the membership cost of joining a regional water authority. There's a fixed charge, and then there is a commodity charge based on how much water you're using. So both of those are built into this additional bar that we've added here on alternative 2. But it's important to note that the Great Lakes Water Authority's rate model is based on distance from their water treatment plants, because you have to deliver water from that location all the way out to where Ann Arbor is. And Ann Arbor would probably be one of the furthest customers of Great Lakes Water Authority. So likely, you know, when the numbers that we compared to and we built in here are probably lower than what Ann Arbor would likely anticipate, again, just because of the distance from the source, which is again built into their rate model. If we wanted to get an exact cost of what that would be, we would need to do a fair bit of additional work that I can talk a little bit about later. And that would really involve negotiations with the Great Lakes Water Authority, which we have not initiated at this point in time. Next slide, please. So the next slides, the next things that we've added to both alternatives are the future debt service. And this is the future debt service associated with either rehabilitating the water treatment plant. So this would be the annual debt service associated with the $108 million if we were going to go with alternative one, versus the plus $300+ million associated for alternative two. You can see obviously the debt service and the bonding costs for a $300 million debt is substantially more than 100 million, which is reflected in the sizes of the bars with the two different alternatives. Next slide, please. And then the last thing that we are adding here is future unknown capital costs for either solution. So obviously, as we move forward into the future, there may be things that weren't anticipated. This could be coming under each scenario that we would need to build into our annual revenue requirements. Distribution system operation, maintenance, replacement of infrastructure, water main, that would be required under both options. So that would be things that might be captured in these bars. But also, if there's any additional improvements that were needed under the regional water connection in the city's water system in order to accept the water, the $300 million estimate only encapsulated the connection from the Great Lakes water supply points to the perimeter of the city. If there's additional pumping or distribution requirements in the city that were needed to accommodate that, they weren't captured. And again, some of the costs that weren't captured in the city's debt service is if we had to do additional treatment in the future for emerging contaminants, like additional treatment for PFAS or dioxane that potentially could be needed, weren't captured in the debt service that's part of the future debt service block. So the last thing that I'll add before I wrap this up regarding the financial requirements is that the council has already approved the rates in order to support the city's plans to rehabilitate the water treatment plant. So in terms of action that would be needed to be taken by council in order to support the infrastructure improvements from a rate standpoint, there wouldn't be anything necessary over the next 2-year cycle that council's approved rates for. But if the council were to direct the city to further evaluate and potentially become part of the regional water supply, a reassessment of the rates would be needed to make sure that we could capture the additional costs that are likely incorporated into that scenario. Next slide, please. So initially, when we were putting this together, our intention was to provide this information to council and not provide a recommendation from staff. And we were going to be agnostic and let council, use the information we provided and to make a decision. However, several council members requested that staff provide a recommendation to council. So we've incorporated that at council's request. And based on the risk assessment that was provided in an earlier slide and the financial assessment associated with the costs of the different alternatives, at this point, staff is recommending that the city proceed with a conceptual design to upgrade the city's water treatment plant and not continue to evaluate connection to a regional water supply. Next slide, please. So our next steps, our intention, depending upon maybe what we hear at the balance of this meeting based on feedback from council, our intention would be at a future council meeting to bring forward a recommendation to implement staff's recommendation, which would be to rehabilitate the city's water treatment plant and begin the preliminary design process associated with that. That's alternative one. However, there was at least one council member that requested that the city continue to vet the regional water supply alternative, which would involve some additional engineering, some additional study, begin to engage the Great Lakes Water Authority on what it would look like and actually get a proposal from them. So we'll our intent would be to bring a second resolution at the same council meeting for council's consideration concurrent with the staff's proposed recommendation. So council can debate that in a public forum and decide whether they want to pursue that. If we did decide to pursue that alternative, that will add some additional cost because at this point we hadn't anticipated funding that additional work, and the cost of that would be included, so council would know what that would be when they're considering this as part of the resolution in the future. And it would also extend the schedule because it would delay our ability to move forward with the staff's recommendation if we had to evaluate this alternative as well. Next slide, please. All right, well, that is the conclusion of our formal presentation. I'm going to turn it over to Tina to facilitate the discussion. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Tina Olson. I'm with the Huron River Group. I will be calling on council members and mayor in the order in which I see you raise your hands. And then Brian will be leading the response to questions and comments. So the first one up is Council Member Hayner.
Thanks, and thanks for putting this presentation together. I wasn't on council in 2015, but I remember reading the study at the time, and it seemed pretty thorough and pretty conclusive that we were going to have to make these large investments in our system and continue to make these investments, and that's fine. So just a couple quick questions. So would the conceptual design for the plant consider, in the 2015 report, we talked about small changes that may up our 1 million gallons per, or 22 million gallons today to 25 million gallons per day capacity of that plant. Are we going to be studying options on that site that maximize our gallons a day capacity with this proposal, this design scheme? I mean, it seems like we should go for the largest system because we've seen a lot of growth, a lot of regional growth. SIO has growth, the townships, and so on. So I just wondered if that was the considered option, or are we leaving that to you guys to decide what the options are for prospective plant changes?
We will be evaluating size for
Okay.
sure as part of this. And the intent would be to hit based on what our future projected demands are and capacity for the city, to hit that sweet spot. So there's pros to making sure that we can be able to deliver, say, what our 90 percentile demand is, but you don't also want to over design it. So we would be hitting that sweet spot with this proposal.
I see that GLWA supplies Genesee and Flint, or Lapeer rather, areas, and I think that's Flint. And so I guess our costs would be similar to their costs as far as based on distance. One thing that isn't in there is, I mean, it is somewhat in there, and I appreciate it, is the consideration of risk that's out of our control, right? So like if we are the 4 GLWA plants, if ours is coming from the lowest downriver one, there's a risk that might be beyond our control where they have to hustle to cut off that intake and bring up the processing into 3 other plants, and how, you know, who gets that priority in that organization. So, I mean, that'll happen if we move forward. I think between this and our conversation that we had, and thanks for having that meeting a couple months back, I kind of got a sense that we should continue to invest in our current plant. I guess the only other, it's not really a question. I guess I'll pass and let others talk. And thank you for the presentation.
Next up is Councilmember Ramlowy.
Thank you, and thanks for bringing this information here tonight. I have a question on, you know, how much further we're going to need to invest in our water treatment plant. You've discussed you have 2 different plants, one more modern than the other. How long does plant 2 have left to it? What would the cost be to replace plant 2? It doesn't seem like that's got 100 years left on it. So my concern is that we're not necessarily getting the bottom line with just replacing plant 1, because there are going to be future costs in the rest of the facility at a later time. So do we know what that would cost? So that we're comparing apples to apples in terms of complete and total water system, if that makes sense to you, because I think, again, just replacing the one part of the plant isn't necessarily replacing the whole thing. So we get a total cost.
So the 2015 study does have some data on the costs for replacing the other plant as well. That was one of the alternatives that was looked at. So we do have that. I don't have those numbers at my fingertips, but we can communicate back out after this meeting and share those with you. That's something you're interested in.
Yeah, please.
And in terms of the timing, you know, our intention would be again to right size any improvements we made to plant 1, so it would be able to hit the sort of the sweet spot of what we would need in 90% of the days of the calendar year. And then you would have plant 2, which now is our main plant, sort of as the backup. So that it could be rehabilitated and not replaced, and be able to serve a fairly, you know, several more decades for sure. So I think that would be something that we would need to look at, is what makes sense. It may not make sense to do a complete replacement based on what its usage would be after plant 1 is replaced.
Yeah, thank you. I think that having that information, I'd be better informed on making a decision. And if there's still time to ask a follow-up question with the contamination that looms and threatens our drinking water, whether the proposed plant replacement does that $108 million include any type of technology or equipment to treat dioxane if that unfortunate event occurs?
That does not include dioxane treatment currently, that 108 million.
Do we have any estimates on what that additional capability would cost to include in this 100-year facility?
We have some numbers that were developed, you know, it maybe 10 years ago. So we can pull that together too and share that. I don't have that at my fingertips, but we can share that also with council before the next meeting.
If you would, please. That's another key element for me to make an informed decision. Thank you.
All right, next up is Councilmember Griswold.
Okay, thank you for a very professional presentation. I appreciate that you're being proactive. I'm trying to better understand how this process initiated and what the costs to date are. I'm a member of the Environmental Commission. I don't remember this topic being discussed or initiated by the Environmental Commission, but I could be wrong.
Let me see if I understand your question, Councilmember Griswold. Are you talking about the process to evaluate these 2 alternatives and bring that to council for consideration?
Yes, yes. When did that initiate?
So this project, we did this alternative analysis back in 2015, and we presented that to council for consideration at that point. And the recommendation then was to proceed with improving the water treatment plant. Because of several other, I sort of went through the other projects that have come up in the interim that have delayed the initiation of this project. So this project has been in our capital improvement plan for many years, and it had surfaced, and then we came up with we completed our study, we shared that with council, and then we had intended to continue on the process. However, other things came up in the queue that were more pressing that we had to address that caused this project to be delayed. So because of the delay, we thought it made sense to bring this back to council for consideration, because again, it's a new council and there's many things that have happened over the past 6 years. So it's been in the queue for many years already.
Oh, okay. And would you recommend that before it comes back to council with the resolutions that it go to the Environmental Commission for some advice? And one of the reasons I'm asking that is I've received 2 communications from well, one from Dan Bicknell and one from a professor at the University of Michigan, identify many of the risks and concerns of getting the water from the Great Lakes Water Authority, given that our water source is below the River Rouge outlet, as well as the length of time and distance that our water would travel in a pipe from there would require additional treatment. And then also the analysis from 2020 shows that the lead level in the Great Lakes Water Authority sampling in Ypsilanti, the lead level is 9 times what it is in our Ann Arbor water. So I agree it's extremely technical, and so I'm just wondering if it would benefit from the Environmental Commission weighing in before we spend additional money. And the last question is regarding contingency planning. I think that's also important. And I'm wondering if more wells could have been evaluated in the past.
Brian, before you answer, Councilmember Griswold, I might volunteer that if it's helpful, we can certainly do a briefing for the Environmental Commission. And when we bring resolutions forward to City Council, the council members can refer them to the Environmental Commission at that time if you would like.
Oh, okay, thanks. I just see that a significant amount of staff resources and funds have been devoted to this, and I appreciate that, but I'm just wondering if we could improve the process.
Certainly, thank you. Brian?
You're welcome.
So, so John addressed the comment about the Environmental Commission. So your other question was,
Could
memory, sorry.
No, that's okay, because it was a long
Oh,
one.
about it. Can we look at about additional wells? Is that it?
For a contingency plan, not necessarily for an alternative, but just contingency.
Let me give that some thought. You know, we do actually have some additional well incorporated currently into our capital improvement plan. At this point, you know, our plan, our current plan is to build up our well capacity in order to meet what the plant is currently designed to produce, which is 10 million gallons, treat 10 million gallons per day of well water. So whether it would make sense to consider to try to augment or not as part of future plans, I think we'd have to give that some more thought. I don't have really a response to that at this point in time.
Oh, okay, thanks. Yeah, and I didn't mean to put you on the spot. It was more for future consideration. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
And on the question of lead, Brian can correct me if I'm wrong, but much of lead that is sampled is a local regional problem, not necessarily from the plant producing the water. The reason Ann Arbor has low lead numbers right now is we have virtually no lead left in our system.
Okay.
That's correct. So the source of the lead is typically customer site plumbing, so it's not coming from the plant. So the question in terms of water supply is Detroit water more corrosive than Ann Arbor water, and could that impact current site piping in Ann Arbor and create more of a lead issue for those few folks that still have galvanized service connections? And you know, we're in the process of planning for removing all of those. So in Ann Arbor, we're hoping, you know, over the next 10 years to have all of our sources of lead removed. So the lead shouldn't be an issue regardless of whose water supply we are connected to.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, next up is Councilmember Briggs.
Thank you, and thanks for kind of the process that we're going through here. I've appreciated the tour of the water treatment plant and the working session and presentation that makes a relatively complicated subject pretty easy to follow, so thank you. And especially this color-coded comparison chart. But I did have one question on the slide that's risk to source water quality, where Ann Arbor's rehabbing the city's water treatment plant is is rated as yellow, meaning medium risk impact, and the regional Great Lakes is lower risk. And so I can understand what the risks are that probably, I was wondering if you could, you mentioned you could speak more to kind of what went into this assessment. I can imagine what went into Ann Arbor's assessment in terms of the dioxane plume and thinking about that. But in terms of Great Lakes, Water Authority and the Detroit River, I'm curious what led that to being a lower risk, given some of the industrial pollutants in that area.
I'm going to see if Bob Green can jump in and address that question.
Yeah, thank you for the question. And generally speaking, while most of the supply would come to Ann Arbor from either their Belle Isle intake, which is at the head end of Belle Isle, which is, really at the mouth of the Detroit River. That intake sits inside of a bit of a protected harbor, if you will, on well, it's kind of interesting because the river almost turns east and west there at Belle Isle. So it's kind of sitting on the north side of the island, so to speak. The other intake is the Fighting Island intake, which is, a little further to the south. The volume of water that flows through and from, prior sampling, over the years, and I actually had spent a number of years with MDEQ covering the Southeast Michigan area as the supervisor for drinking water. So sampling for, pesticides, herbicides, volatile organics, and it's generally respected, as a very clean water. Obviously some sediments probably in the bottom of the river that rarely get, disturbed, might cause concern, but the wind typically comes from the west and or north and blows, towards the east. And so generally speaking, what's happening with the industrial corridor, say from our neighbors on the other side of the river, the international boundary hasn't really proven itself to affect either of these two intakes. And so just my own perspective from, my career is that, the intakes that are most likely to provide water to Ann Arbor haven't really demonstrated themselves to be too vulnerable to contamination. So I don't know if that helps or answers what you were asking.
It does. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little bit, I'll just add to Bob's comment, it's a little bit subjective, obviously, when we're dealing with source water, because these are things that are outside of our jurisdiction and control. So you look at the Huron River, which is, an inland river with fairly substantial development, agricultural, and we have some known contaminants that we're already dealing with. I think that was the reason that it was recognized as being a little bit higher risk than the Detroit system, because we just happen to have some known emerging contaminant issues and they don't at this point in time.
Okay, Councilmember Song, you're next up.
Hi, everyone. I was reading up on how Jackson and Traverse City have already gone down this path and have approved updates to their wastewater treatment plants back in April and May. And there was some mention about Michigan Clean Water State Revolving Fund loan. Is that something that we're looking into too? Or that we would qualify for?
So our plans regardless of which alternative we pursued, because of the size of this potential investment, we would be looking at what state revolving or federal programs. There are some federal programs that may be even more lucrative that are available for water and wastewater improvements. One of them is called WIFIA, and it's where a community like Ann Arbor could borrow directly from the U.S. Treasury. So incorporating loan programs and potentially searching for grant opportunities would be absolutely incorporated into whichever of the alternatives that we pursued.
And then a follow-up question. Can you speak a little bit to how community engagement might look like after this passes council? I mean, we have a new equitable engagement initiative, and I'm wondering if this is where along in the process they would be engaged, and maybe this is more for John. Or maybe John and Brian.
We can certainly plug in some of the resources from our equitable engagement initiative. That's that I would call that initiative inchoate at this point, but there are certainly lessons that we can apply.
And we have built into the budget a pretty robust, I mean, this is a pretty transformative project, right? We're talking about the future of the water system for the community for the next several generations. So we have spent a fair bit of time looking at how we're going to engage, and it's part of our scope of work. And we can also share that scope of work with you. I don't, again, have it committed to memory, but Huron River Group would be leading that effort, and we would be pretty aggressive in terms of trying to reach the broader community and incorporate their feedback into the process.
Great, thank you both.
And next up is Councilmember Hayner.
You know, if my council colleague wants to go first, because that'll be my second time around, I will defer to Ms. Dish.
All right. Councilmember Dish? I think you're on mute. There you go.
Thank you. My questions are not urgent, but there was a little bit of discussion on the Environmental Commission of this. And I remember that one commissioner asked whether there could be a hybrid option. And I wanted Mr. Steglitz to speak to that. I know you explained this to me, but you explain it better than I do, and obviously. And I also wondered if you could say a little bit more about some of the research that you are conducting at the water treatment plant and how that helps us really stay ahead of other cities in providing high quality water.
Sure. So your first question was, oh, sorry.
It was about could
a hybrid approach.
Hybrid.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I lost connectivity for a second there. I'm sorry. So a hybrid approach, I think you're alluding to, could we blend sources, get some water, or have water be connected to a regional water supply as a backup potentially to our water system. The challenge that we face is that our water qualities are not compatible. The city's current water quality and the Great Lakes Water Authority. We use a different disinfectant, and we would have very significant taste and odor issues if we connected the city's current water system to the Great Lake Water Authority. So it's not that it would be impossible, but we wouldn't be able to be sort of flipping back and forth. We would need to, you need to pick one or the other. We've decided what we're using currently as our secondary disinfectant. Monochloramine is very effective because it lasts a long time. It's very persistent, and it also controls disinfection byproducts. So for us, from a regulatory perspective, with our source water, it's the right fit. Great Lakes uses a different disinfectant, and it has different, pros and cons. And we would have to evaluate all of that if we were bringing their water into our system. We would anticipate that there would be a fair bit of time when there would be water quality challenges that we would face in our community if we changed our disinfectant. But it's not like it's insurmountable. It happens in other communities that make these changes. But the public engagement would have to be very, very extensive, because we're probably would be getting a lot of calls about taste and odor issues if we made that transition. Your second question was about research. We're pretty active in the research community. You've seen some proposals come your way about some grants that we've applied for, and another one that we're working on right now, actually, you'll be seeing shortly. And the benefit of this is Ann Arbor, we want to be thought of as solution oriented. As we run into water quality challenges, PFAS is a perfect example. We were one of the first utilities to sort of take this on. One is to communicate to our customers about it, which a lot of utilities were not doing. Even when we didn't have the answers, we were trying to be transparent with our data. We put out a monthly water quality report. We're reporting on some of these emerging contaminant levels in our drinking water every month, which is well beyond what any of the regulatory requirements would need or require us to do. But we've also, done research on looking at, how can we remove some of these contaminants that aren't even regulated. We had a water quality goals that we established for our own community well before, 18 months, 2 years before the state even regulated these. That sort of goes to this issue of autonomy, is that we're able to reflect the interests and the demands of our customers. Which in Ann Arbor, I think, we have a very educated community, and people feel very strongly about us sort of going beyond the minimum. And having control of our water system, be able to participate in research and solution development and implementing these things before they're regulated is something that we've been fortunate enough to be able to do, and fortunate enough to have your support for historically. So did that answer your question, Councilmember Dish, about research?
There we go. Bob Green had his hand up. I don't know, Bob, did you have something you wanted to add to Brian's?
Brian, I just wanted to also add that there's a contractual restriction in the model contract from GLWA that would prohibit blending of their water with any other community's water if you were purchasing from them. If it were strictly just backup connections, that would, become a cost analysis. In other words, only turn it on if you were in a dire emergency, just be additional capital. So just wanted to make that point. Thank you.
Okay, we had a Councilmember Painter. You're next.
Yeah, thanks. And Brian, I could talk about this stuff all day, so I appreciate the second opportunity. I got a letter from some folks. They didn't give a way to contact them. They called themselves A2 Citizens for an actual letter for clean water. I don't know how many other people got that. And I wish I could have reached out to them, but there was no return address, nothing. And they asked me, could we be our own regional authority? Because they had considerations that we weren't a true public utility, but sort of a municipal authority. And I know that's sort of a fine line. And I don't think we have the volume to be a regional authority to bring in IPSI or other communities to create our own little binary star water system out here. And I just want to throw it out there because they had reached out, and please email me and we can talk about it some more. The 1,4-dioxane, when we plan our new plan, if that's how we move forward, I assume we're going to leave space in the treatment train somehow to potentially have room for that in the future, either excess wiring, plumbing, fittings, whatever, so we can divert that through whatever the preferred chemistry part of the train would be. I know you have to buffer and other things for advanced oxidation. So I guess my question is, are we going to leave space in our treatment train for that? A second question I had was about our lead and copper rules. I know we're ahead on that because we're IDing it as we replace the meters and aggressively replacing any potentially suspicious lead or copper inputs into our system. I would assume with GLWA, would we be rates have to be a cost of service in our state, and so would their rates could potentially fluctuate depending on where they are in the lead and copper replacement system. Is each community responsible for its lead and copper dealings, or is sorry about that, is that the water system's responsibility? And then one more quick one after that.
So regarding lead and copper, that is compliance is the responsibility of the customer. So in our case, that would be Ann Arbor. So each of the communities who are customers of the Great Lakes Water Authority have to make sure that they're in compliance with the lead and copper rules, because they're the ones who are managing their distribution system, and this is a distribution system issue. So I'm sure that there is some partnership components also, but we wouldn't be, our rates wouldn't be funding lead and copper compliance from another member utility of the Great Lakes Water Authority.
Oh, okay.
So
yeah,
our
thanks.
rates,
Thanks.
our rates would be, we would be getting not raw water, treated water delivered from the Great Lakes. And then our rates would have to build in our own leading copper compliance, as well as managing our distribution system and things like that. So,
Okay. Yeah, well, I appreciate that.
so
I figured that's
yeah.
how it went down, but I wasn't sure because, you know, if we're going to start evaluating things on or scoring things in a matrix, and one of them is it's contribution to equity goals. You know, I'm not sure that helping Detroit pay for their water would count as you know, a contribution to the general equity of the Southeast Michigan. It's kind of iffy. So 2 more quick questions. One is probably a yes or no. Well, they might, and one is for council generally. So my question is, do we do annual or quarterly priority pollutant testing on our own water, finished water, or inbound or outbound water, you know, pre or post finish, I guess? And the second question is, you know, this all bubbled up and it's been stated a couple of times that at least one council member has asked for this. Does anybody want to take credit for asking for this GLWA survey? What spurred this interest after the 250 grand we paid for the 2015 report? That laid it out pretty clearly. Does anybody want to let me know what the interest in GLWA is? Is it a sustainability matter, a cost issue? What spurred this? It wasn't me.
So I guess I'll address your other questions first, and then I'll turn it back over to Tina. You asked first about dioxane treatment. So we would absolutely be looking, can you hear me? We would absolutely be looking at, you know, as part of this capital plan, if we're going to rehabilitate the water plant, we're going to make sure that we're well positioned to deal with the things that we know about or may have to face, you know, over the next, you know, 20 plus years. So incorporating, thinking through what we would need to do if we needed to at some point treat for 1,4-dioxane, that would be part of the plan. It makes no sense to build that unless it was needed. So, you know, as you said, we sort of would consider it plug and play, where we would have the capability and the space dedicated if for some reason this was needed, but it would not be built until it was needed, because it makes no sense to make that investment if it's, you know, if it's not needed. Your other question was about pollutants, and I sort of lost you for a second, but I think you were asking about, you know, do we test for certain pollutants?
Well, I just wondered
you
if
know,
we did the priority pollutants tests, like the EPA has a priority pollutants list. And I know there's like a test that runs those, however many hundred some it is. I just wondered if that's a test we do annually or quarterly.
That term priority pollutants doesn't ring a bell for me. I'm not sure if someone else can on our team can, I can look into that if no one else has an answer. I'm not sure if that's on the drinking water side or maybe on the clean water side. Is anybody familiar with that?
Brian, I've never heard it called priority pollutants, but there is, and I can ask Corrine to jump in, but there's the UCMR, the unregulated contaminants that various communities are asked to monitor for. And Corrine, I don't know if you have anything additional to add to that.
I do not have anything additional to add to that. Thank you.
It came up when I was researching our EPA involvements, and they call it a priority pollutant list, and they have a toxic pollutant list and priority pollutant list, and apparently there's a standard set of analytical test methods that water authorities can use, and so it's just another way to see what's in our water. And but we can talk about this offline, Brian.
We made a note, and we'll get back to you
Yeah,
and
I
let you
appreciate
know. My guess is that there may be some overlap between what we're doing and that list, or we're doing the whole complete list. I'm not sure, but
yeah, it's,
I mean,
a lot of organic and inorganic. It's a lot of chlorinated benzene, stuff like that, you know.
And we're testing for many of those. So my guess is that it's probably the things that we do. And, you know, we do over 100,000 tests on the drinking water every year. So, and there's different frequencies for different contaminants. So it's a pretty robust program, but we'll get a response back to you on this priority pollutant list.
Okay, next up is Councilmember Griswold.
Yes, when we talk about 1,4-dioxane, it is very scary. However, based on the latest research, we are at least 50 years, if not more, from even the risk of dioxane getting into the source of our drinking water. And I would suggest that anyone that's interested, just Google CARD and you can get information on that. There has been dioxane in the news regarding the risk of vapor intrusion, but that is not contamination to our source water. And also, we've made tremendous improvements in the last year in terms of dioxane remediation with all of the work that's being done, the dual paths. I won't go into detail and bore everyone, but I do want to say that community members and staff at all levels are working together on this. And also we have a world-class water treatment facility and staff. Thank you to Mr. Steglitz and his staff. And sometimes we take that for granted, but it is, for me, it's an easy decision to stay with our Ann Arbor drinking water. So thank you for the presentation.
Thank you.
We don't have
Tina, I just wanted to jump in. I just received a message from one of our panelists who said that the priority pollutant list is a wastewater thing, so clean water side. But we can still take a look at that, Councilmember Hayner, and give you some feedback on the kinds of things that we also test for in the drinking water that probably overlap with some items on that list.
Did we have any other council members who had any questions or comments? I don't see any other hands up. No. Oh, there we go. Councilmember Ramlawi.
Thank you. Just on going back to the couple questions that I had, will we be able to get that information before or at the time that we get this choice sent to council as to which path we'd like to take regarding Plant 2, the cost of modernizing Plant 2, and then the cost of adding the dioxane, so we have a total cost apples to apples ratio, comparison, at least for myself, on these two paths.
I would propose, and I will coordinate with Mr. Fournier and Mr. Hupy, that maybe we address this as an RFI, and we can pull some information together and send it back through the RFI system if they think that's appropriate.
However, whatever channel is needed, I would like to have my colleagues also be able to look at this information and not just the council member who requested, if it's possible.
I think the answer to your question would be yes, and we will determine the method and figure out how to get that information to council.
Okay. Anybody else?
Turning the meeting back over to the mayor.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Hupy and Mr. Stiglitz, and one and all. I'm very grateful for the work that you all have put in on this, getting us this critical information. Obviously, we are in Ann Arbor incredibly proud of our water system, and you all do an excellent job for the community and have for years. And it is it's our obligation to make sure that it works and that we invest in it and that we continue to provide outstanding award-winning drinking water to the community, and that's just what we intend to do. So thank you. We now come to public comment general time. Public comment general time is an opportunity for members of the public to speak to council and community about matters of municipal interest. To speak at public comment general time, one need not have signed up in advance. Speakers to speak at public comment general time should enter the number on your screen. That is 877-853-5247. 877-853-5247. Once you're connected, please enter meeting ID 942-1273-2148. 942-1273-2148. Having done so, please enter *9. *9 to indicate that you wish to speak. When it is your turn to speak, our clerk will identify you with the last 3 digits of your telephone number. When you speak, you will have 3 minutes in which to speak, so please pay close attention to the time. Our clerk will notify you when 30 seconds are remaining and when your time has expired. When your time has expired, please conclude your remarks and cede the floor. Is there anyone who'd like to speak at public comment?
Caller with the phone number ending in 432. Press star 6 to unmute yourself. Caller with the phone number ending in 432, do you have a comment? Go ahead. Caller 432, you're unmuted, but we don't hear you. Caller with the phone number ending in 534, do you have a comment? Caller 534, press star 6 to unmute your phone. Go ahead.
Good evening. This is Tom Stallberg calling from Lowertown in Ann Arbor. I'd like to make this very brief, but not shortchange the pride that the city citizens should have for staff in this area of our city services. So thank you very much, staff. This is one of the highlights of what we do well in our city. Thank you.
Caller with the phone number ending in 432, do you have a comment? Caller with the phone number ending in 432. Caller 432, do you have a comment?
Hi, my name is Dan Bicknell, and I'm president of Global Environment Alliance. Last Friday, I provided City Council with a GEA review of the City and Great Lakes Water Authority water quality. Overall, the City of Ann Arbor has better drinking water quality than the Great Lakes Water Authority. A review of the City and Great Lakes Water Authority drinking water quality shows that the Great Lakes Water Authority drinking water contains about 9 times more cancer-causing chemicals and 9 times more lead as the city drinking water, based upon the data contained in the City and Great Lakes Water Authority 2020 water quality reports. The Great Lakes Water Authority intake for drinking water that would be provided to the city comes from the Detroit River, not Lake Huron. The state of Michigan has determined that the Great Lakes Water Authority drinking water intakes are, quote, highly susceptible to potential contamination, according to the Great Lakes Water Authority 2020 water quality report. There have been documented contamination of the Great Lakes Water Authority drinking water by volatile organic chemicals, including dioxane. The Detroit River intakes are downstream of rivers with PFAS and other contaminants, and in 2019, PFAS was found in the Detroit River intakes feeding the Great Lakes Water Authority. There are potential adverse impacts to the Great Lakes Water Authority drinking water intakes from Sarnia, Canada, chemical industry spills. In summary, the risk to the source water quality is lower with rehabilitating the city water treatment plant than going to the Great Lakes Water Authority Detroit River source. As we've talked about, the city water treatment plant includes an activated carbon system which removes PFAS and many other types of organic chemicals, whereas the Great Lakes Water Authority water treatment plants do not contain this activated carbon technology. The city water treatment plant is one of the most advanced water treatment plants in the state of Michigan. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor, I don't see any other callers on the line with their hands up.
Seeing no one further, public comment is closed. Other communications today from council? Oh, we've got 202.
Caller with the phone number ending in 202. Do you have a comment? Press *6.
Thank you. Good evening. I am Rita Locke Caruso. I live at 556 Glendale Circle in Ann Arbor. I have approximately 40 years of experience as a toxicologist, recently retired as Emerita Professor of Toxicology from the University of Michigan. I strongly advocate for continuing Ann Arbor's current water treatment facility and against further consideration to switch our water service to the Great Lakes Water Authority. Ann Arbor's water treatment facility produces high-quality, affordable, safe drinking water. It operates in a reasonable manner. It is responsible to local needs and concerns. The same is not all certain for the Great Lakes Water Authority. I will address two major water contamination concerns I have with the Great Lakes Water Authority. First are chlorination and disinfection byproducts. These will be higher in water from the Great Lakes Water Authority. Chlorine and chloramine are common treatments to disinfect water. The farther the finished water has to travel after leaving the water treatment plant, the higher the concentration of chlorine or chloramine is needed to control bacteria and other pathogens. Disinfection byproducts form when chlorine reacts with naturally occurring organic matter like plant debris. At least 700 water disinfection byproducts have been identified, but only about 80 of those have been evaluated for toxicity. Among identified disinfection byproducts, several have known carcinogenic, mutagenic, reproductive, and developmental toxicity. Bottom line, in water from the Great Lakes Water Authority, Ann Arbor will be at the end of the line with the longest travel time in pipes, requiring more chlorination and the most opportunity for formation of harmful disinfection byproducts. My second concern is the Detroit River. This is not a preferred source of drinking water compared to Ann Arbor's current water sources. The Detroit River would be the source of water from Ann Arbor via the Great Lakes Water Authority. One water intake is a mere 2 or so miles downstream of Zug Island, a heavily polluted industrial site. Zug Island is also where the Rouge River flows into the Detroit River. The Rouge River courses through an area cited as the most polluted zip code in Michigan, home to the huge 250-acre Marathon Refinery, a Great Lakes Water Authority wastewater treatment plant, and dozens of industrial processing plants. The other water intake is where Lake St. Clair drains into the Detroit River. This intake is downstream from Sarnia's heavily industrialized and polluted Chemical Valley along the St. Clair River in Canada. The St. Clair River flows from Lake Huron to Lake St. Clair at such a strong flow rate that a chemical spill in Sarnia will reach U.S. downstream water intakes in only minutes, according to a 2014 report by the NOAA Great Lakes Environmental Research Laboratory. Bottom line, the Detroit River, with water intakes downstream from highly industrialized and polluted sites, is a more highly contaminated, less secure source of drinking water for Ann Arbor compared to the Huron River. In conclusion, if we move to the Great Lakes Water Authority, we trade local control of high-quality water testing, treatment, and service for water with higher levels of chemical contaminants, greater risk for future contamination, and more chlorination. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no one further, public comment is closed. Are there communications from council? Councilor Griswold.
I just want to acknowledge our community members who took the time to speak this evening. Although the high point of the evening was actually a peek at the baby, so thank you.
Further communication from council? The motion to adjourn, please move by Councilman Griswold, second by Councilmember Nelson. Discussion, all in favor? Opposed? We are adjourned. Mr. Fournier, thank you up and down.